For the longest time, it's been said, and if you look at different arguments from people who have been talking about, say, the gaming industry, that exclusives is this so-called important piece of the puzzle. I'm looking at Nintendo Switch 2's launch and I'm laughing going, yeah, right. But that's a whole different conversation. We're going to focus on PlayStation in this regard because I can almost comfortably tell you that their emphasis on exclusives from their first party has not necessarily been the thing that's attracted people to their ecosystem. What they've done is that they've leveraged over time both their first party games as exclusives and blocking third party games from going elsewhere as a combined feature for you to basically come into their ecosystem. They cannot realistically or could never have realistically built their ecosystem and platform from their first party games like Nintendo did. And in this particular video, we're going to take a look at a few things and see, even based on the state of play with a lot of the third parties now showing up, how this is PlayStation's real business, because a lot of the developers that used to sign these exclusivity deals are seeing that they're leaving money on the table. They're looking at business opportunities. And in one case, like Pearl Abyss's case with Crimson Desert, they decided not to follow that exclusivity paradigm and block their game from going to Xbox. Now, what is this particular instance of events in the market that's actually eroding this exclusivity claim? Well, it's the saturation of games. In fact, what's happened is more and more games coming out and more games being available continues to erode this particular reality. If you've seen right now, if you judge from PlayStation 4 days, when in the 2018 through 2019 period, PlayStation brought out some of its best, in my opinion anyways, of that generation hits. I can say Uncharted 4, I can say Ghost of Tsushima, I can talk about Spider-Man, God of War. Those games really were hits. But previously, there were not necessarily too many of the AAA efforts in PlayStation's coffers that were not locked third-party exclusives to bolster their ecosystem. If you even think about specific individual benefits, for instance, Batman Arkham Knight having exclusive PlayStation content, or Street Fighter V launching exclusively on PS5 and PC, and a few other efforts, you realize that this is probably some of the stuff that you have to go and, comb over. But now in today's market, with more games being everywhere, I've cited many times the Steam game releases by year, where I've shown you the different number of games launched every single year on Steam since they started collating the data in 2006. What you realize is there's an exponential growth in the launch of games at every given year. Developers are getting their hands on free engines, they're getting better at using them, and they're getting faster at launching games. And every time I've cited this data set, I've been told that this is only relevant to PC. But here's the thing, I never said that this data set was to be used as a, direct, measure of PlayStation, but could be used as a visual to see how the games and their saturation have gone. Well, fortunately for me, I was able to come up with a source from Moby Games where they basically listed the games on the PlayStation 5 by year. So this is actually pretty cool. Let me show you what we're seeing here. In 2020, when the console launched, there were 75 games launched on the PlayStation 5. Now, look at Steam in 2020. There were 9,666 games launched that same year. When you look at the next year, in 2021, from 75 games, there were 481 PlayStation 5 games released in 2021, according to this particular chart. This is, according to calculations, a 500% increase from year one to year two in the number of games launching. Ladies and gentlemen, even if we look at the Steam releases from 9,666 to 11,280, I don't think we have that same correlation, because it's actually, very funny that people would say that those games are not necessarily, going up that high. If you look at the calculation in terms of this with Steam, they had already gone through their explosion, but it seemed like it was somewhat progressive, if you understand. In fact, in 2019, the number went down. And if you take a look at, for instance, this move from here, calculations show that it's only about 16.7% increase. Do you want to know what happened with the PlayStation ecosystem in 2022? In 2022, that number moved from 481 to 895. you already can see that this is at least close to a 30 to 40% increase in this particular regard. I mean, think about it. It's something of a, what do I call it? It's something of a feat in its own right, because when you kind of think about it, like, ladies and gentlemen, I can't emphasize how much I was actually thinking that the percentage increase was somewhat similar to Steam, but instead it was not just, similar, it was exponentially explosive as to how many of these games were basically going to PlayStation and how that number was increasing as time went on. So the very next year, you had a 500% increase. Then the following year, an 86% increase. I was wrong. I thought it was like a 40-something% increase, if these calculations are actually correct in terms of the increases. And yes, as I'm looking at it, it appears that this model is actually using the percentage increase calculation formula to get this done. Now, as we move on to 2023, things are slightly different. It does increase, but it's now 952 games released in the year 2023, which is also a significant increase from the previous years. By 2024, that number is now evening out around 872. So you're already seeing kind of like after that explosion from around here to here, things are now starting to even out if you kind of look at them on a specific chart. Now, with this explosion in games, you're talking 500%, 80%, in some cases, maybe, 20%, 30%, the conversation about exclusivity starts to, make you question yourself and say, okay, what is going on here? Why are, people still talking about exclusivity? Well, they're talking about exclusivity because many of them have not been paying attention as to the availability of games that are out here in the gaming industry. Exclusivity was all about the specialness of the game. Oh, you had this really interesting game. Oh, you had this really cool game and nobody else could actually play the game. But now what we're seeing multiple iterations of similar games. In some cases, we're seeing iterations of games set in similar cultures and contexts and environments. Yes, stories may be told differently, but when you look at some exclusives, like, say, for instance, one that was highly anticipated and for the most part controversial because it was announced to come to Xbox, but then eventually the developers somehow could not optimize their game for the Series S. A big weirdness, in my opinion. Wukong was one of those games. But coming down the road with that whole conversation is another game called Wuchang. Wuchang is set in China. The developers are also from the area, and they're telling a tale that is more than likely going to be a folklore or some derivative of a folklore being set into a video game, pretty much in the same genre, hack and slash. So the specialness of an exclusive game is also another thing that basically gets eroded when you have a lot of games out there, because what you're going to see is that reality that, no idea is new under the sun. And so as more developers are pumping out these games, their ideas continue to be reflections of general gaming ideas and tropes and things that gamers have always really wanted to go ahead and play. This particular reason, in my opinion, is solely one of the more critical factors that has pretty much removed this whole shine and lure and, attraction or attractive factor of exclusives at the end of the day. So what this lends credence to is right now, as Xbox is moving and taking its games to PlayStation and realizing that burdening the gamer to go ahead and buy a $500 box to play your $60 game is not the way to do business if you really want to thrive in today's environment. I mean, think about how fast Marvel Spider-Man 2 got ported to PC. PlayStation realized that, man, we gotta take this very expensive game and make money. Think about how Helldivers 2 outsold even Horizon Forbidden West and also pillaged Spider-Man 2 because it had a PC release as well in terms of sales. So they're looking at accessibility and seeing how well it's working out for them, looking at Astrobot in the corner saying, you probably could have held 3 million units had you moved your butt to PC. And now Xbox is coming, after making money on its titles, it's coming over here to PlayStation to farm more money, poach PlayStation players, farm MAUs, and use this particular effort to make itself look like it's being pro-consumer with everybody else and shielding itself from regulators. Exclusivity as a business strategy in gaming or as a forefront is dead for PlayStation. It's very dead for Xbox, and Nintendo is the next to have to explain why we should all go buy a $500 box to play some game that we can already play some version of it somewhere else. Talk to me in the comment section. I appreciate your time and audience. Hopefully we'll talk pretty soon in another one. Peace out.